Jitendra Singh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. The subject of this discussion is a very broad-based one. How can India unlock her natural resources to the future in terms of creating growth? It's a very broad-based question, and the ministry that you handle, Earth Sciences, will play a very key role in coming days in that area. Would you like to elaborate?
No, thank you, Madam. At the outset, I have to thank you for making me a part of this. And I'm glad you asked that because we are these days quite often heard talking about 2047 India, Viksit Bharat 2047. And yes, we feel proud doing so. It also sounds very romantic talking about it. But if you see from the scientific point of view, I think the question that we should be asking ourselves is that where are we going to add the value from to reach that pedestal? It has been there's been a quantum leap in the last 10 years, of course, because when this government came in and Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over, we were among fragile 5. Now we are among top 5. Soon we will be 4 and then number 3 with 5 trillion economy and so on. And by 2047, we envisage reaching that pedestal. But if you try to scientifically analyze it, I think the most important, that is absolutely related to the question that you've put across, that we will need to explore the unexplored resources or underexplored resources of India. And when we talk of that, I think the most underexplored resources which have been exclusive to India is our marine resources. We have a 7,500 long kilometer coastal area, possibly the longest, one of the longest in the world. We have at least 12 states situated along the coast, beginning from Odisha, Bengal, up to the western Ghats, Maharashtra, Gujarat. And that has remained unexplored. The huge wealth of metals, minerals, fisheries, biodiversities. The other day I was telling some of the visitors from Australia, I said, your country is known as Australia, your island known as Australia, your continent known as Australia, but your ocean not known as Australian Ocean, my ocean known as Indian Ocean, because my ancestors could foresee the huge wealth lying inside. But it was only after this government came in, and I must again give credit to Prime Minister Modi, that not once but twice consecutively in his Independence Day addresses in 2023 and 2022, he mentioned Deep Sea Mission. And all of us know that Independence Day is a declaration of intent of the government in place. So normally such scientifically loaded themes are not picked up. But that shows the kind of prioritization and the conviction with which the Prime Minister is pushing forward this. The other resources are Himalayan resources, because we have at least 4 or 5 states lying in the lap of Himalayas, beginning from Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Arunachal. And I think, again, it is during this last 1 decade, we have tried to explore those areas of aroma wealth, the Purple Revolution, which was showcased during the Republic Day parade this year as a tableau, which began from a small town in Jammu and Kashmir, and now it's been replicated in Uttarakhand, Himachal. Again, that is related to science and technology, where the earlier one is, of course, the Earth Sciences, deep sea, where we have now come up with about 3,000 startups with dealing with lavender. So these lavender startups, and now agriculture is one of our exclusive domains. What happened, incidentally, was that the concept of startups came from the West. It landed in Bengaluru, which was an IT city, and we thought it's only IT. And somehow the myth got generated that you have to be a very big scientific brain to be a good startup, which is not so. Now this Aroma mission, which I am talking about, more than 3,000 startups, many of them are not even graduates. But they have the aptitude, they have the passion, the government is giving them all the technology support, all the knowledge support, financial support, market linkage. So that is the other. The third is, of course, space. Now we had all the acumen, all the potential, we had commitment, we had a lot of passion. Just remember those pictures in the archives, Sarabhai carrying some of his material on the carriage of a bicycle. So what we were lacking actually was the kind of enabling milieu which is expected from the policy makers, from the political dispensation, and that has happened after 2014. I think Prime Minister Modi did a marvelous job by allowing us to open up space to private sector. which the media very fondly described as unlocking of media.
Right.
And that is also going to contribute. When we talk of
But there's
2047
a
economy,
very ambitious roadmap there. We're talking about a manned mission. We're talking about another manned moon mission.
Yes.
Take us through the space station.
Yes.
Can you take us through what really is the roadmap ahead? Because
Yeah.
earlier in the day, we had the in-space chief, Mr. Goenka, here.
Absolutely.
How much of a role will the private sector play in realizing these goals?
Absolutely. So I'm glad that you asked it, because it gives me an opportunity to make the audience recall that till about 3 or 4 years back, our Sriharikota was a forbidden premises. If you peeped inside, you were likely to be prosecuted. Now, for each launching, we have thousands and thousands of spectators and not less than 1,000, 2,000 media persons. And that has been possible because last, I think, 3 or 4 years back, Prime Minister allowed us to open it to public-private participation. Look, if we have to move beyond this, where we are, and we have to compete and we have to seek that goal of 2047, then we have to follow the global strategies. We have to live up to the global parameters and to meet the global benchmarks. And when we compare ourselves to, for example, NASA, and we say, usne itna rocket launch ho gaya, humne kya kiya, we don't realize, because we have that gupshup mode, we don't realize that NASA doesn't depend wholly on government, mostly on the non-government sources. And therefore, in the last 3-4 years, there has been a quantum jump in space projects, space initiatives, also space economy. We are today just about 8 to 9% of the world's space economy. But the way we are moving, I think we will increase 3 times in the next 10 years. We might go up to 23, 24%. And not only that, there was a time, we started off very late. Our ISRO was born in 1969, the year which is remembered as the year when the first human being landed on the surface of the moon. That was Neil Armstrong by the American Apollo 8 mission. And we were just born. But today we are reaching the southern pole of the moon before anybody else and offering inputs to the and the findings to NASA as well. Which means that now we are in the same pace and not lagging behind.
Right.
And that is also the reason that the other countries now look forward to us for cues from us. It's no longer the time that we are being led by others. We are there also capable of leading. And I think sitting among the media persons, one of the most beautiful examples is that television happened in America in 1950s. And that famous election of 1960, when this young, handsome John Kennedy turned the tables on the veteran Richard Nixon, was the result of a TV debate.
True.
And we in India didn't know what is TV, what is debate. We got to see our first Chitrahar in Delhi somewhere in 1970s. But it's no longer so. We are among 4 or 5 today in the world who have launched quantum mission. We are among the first who have, I think among the first who have launched bioeconomy policy just recently, about 2 months back, which is called BioE3, which means biotechnology for environment, biotechnology for employment, biotechnology for economy. Because worldwide, the opinion now is that the next industrial revolution is going to be bioeconomy driven, just as the last one was IT driven in 1990s. So it's entirely going to be circular economy, biodegradable things, fuels from the other sources, and we are already into it. So we are no longer behind. So when we talk of space, you will be amused to understand that so far we have launched as many as 432 foreign satellites, European and American satellites from Sriharikota. Out of which, I don't wish to be modest, saying that out of 432, 397 have been launched after Modi came in the last 10 years. So that means more than 90.
That's a very, very interesting.
So we have been
very,
so
very interesting statistic.
And if you see in the term of economy, we have earned 292 million European euros from launching of the European
ESA satellites.
Launches, out of which as much as 260 were earned after 2014.
Right.
The last 10 years of Prime Minister Modi. So again 90%. And if you see the Americans, because as I said, we started off our journey when America was already on moon in 1960. Yeah. But today we have earned as much as $172 million from launching of American satellites, out of which again $157 million were earned after Modi came. So you can see the manner in which our space economy is going up. So A, space, B, our marine resources, C, our Himalayan resources, which of course also include the agriculture. So these were the resources which were very exclusively India's, but they remain unexplored or underexplored.
But sir, with the private sector coming in, the big question on people's minds is how soon is it before we have an Indian SpaceX or an Indian reusable rocket?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that because that creates a lot of interest. See, we will have a space station which will be named Bharat Antariksh Station, and as per the schedule, we hope to have one by 2035, and an Indian on the surface of Moon by 2040, and a first Indian human mission, an Indian in space. Of course, we had one called Rakesh Sharma in the early 80s, but that was a Soviet mission. So first Indian mission, totally developed in India, first indigenous with first Indian carrying. We already have 3 or 4 officers of the Air Force who've been trained in this. They are in Bangalore right now. So they would be the first, and we would try to launch that by the end of 25 or maybe in the beginning of 2026, because the trial flights are still going on. Because you see, we have a crew module there, we have the lab module, and what is very important is, just as it's important and very fascinating sending up a human being into space, it is equally critical getting him back safe. So he has to land into the waters, and you have to have the assistance of the naval guards, the coastal guards. So all that exercise is to be completed in series. Once we are satisfied about the safety of that, and we are satisfied that now, look, we can now accomplish as we have designed, then of course we'll send up. So that will be on. So if I give you the chronology, see, Gaganyaan, the human mission by 2026 beginning, if not 25 end, our Chandrayaan 4 in 27, our Venus mission in 28, our Bharat Antariksh Station in 2035, and Indian on the surface of Moon in 2040.
But will we be a bit late, because Elon Musk is already talking about colonizing Mars and perhaps lunar colonies also?
No, see, what makes difference as far as India is concerned, I think twofold. A, our missions are much more economical and much more cost effective. Like, for example, many people ask, what is the fun of spending so much? But they don't realize we spent only 600 crore on Chandrayaan, which is hardly an amount if you see the amount of the cost of the foreign missions. The simultaneous Soviet mission, which missed its destination, costed them more than 2,000 crore. And I was just talking to you, the other department which I look after, the administrative reforms, where we carried out this Swachhata Abhiyan, and we disposed of the electronic scrap and other scrap, and we earned 2,362 crore. 2,362 crore just by disposing of scrap. So I was
2,000 crores just by disposing scrap.
Yes. So I was telling my officers, I said, we have earned 4 times the Chandrayaan's cost by just selling off it. So we have to take it from that way. So our missions are cost effective for the reason which I was spelling out a few moments ago, that we have a lot of human resource. We may be lacking financial, but we make up for human resource. Like we have the kind of Sarabhai, and that legacy continues. Now, why our mission takes so long? We took about a month or so to reach Moon when we sent this Chandrayaan, because we go like this in circles. We start from a smaller orbit, then go to a longer orbit, then finally we go to the outermost orbit, and then when we are out of the influence, the gravitational influence of the orbit, then we take a jump, get into the next orbit of the Moon. So it's just like driving your car on a slope, switching off your petrol to save the petrol. So we are very good at doing that. Right. So we have actually done there also. So if you have to shoot across, piercing through the orbits against their gravitational forces, then you would need many times the more fuel. So I think our scientific experts and the scientific talent and our cerebral attributes are much more higher, richer compared to them. So that's what makes up and secondly, our space technology is not only confined to the launching of rockets. We are using it extensively in the construction of smart cities, in unmanned railway tracks, in roads, buildings, agriculture sector. We have produced as many as about 70 mutagenic crops through atomic energy. See, we are using atomic energy and space, both for just as space being used for railway tracks, etc., we are using atomic energy for producing mutagenesis of crops. So both these sectors, which are considered to be little distant, are being under this regime used more for bringing in ease for the living of citizens. When you talk of atomic energy, that also reminds me that we have come out with a series of isotopes which are now being used for the management of cancers. So in defense, we have come out with cost-effective bulletproof jackets, lightweight, just by treating it. So, and that is precisely when Homi Bhabha launched this. I mean, incidentally, that strikes me. When Homi Bhabha launched his nuclear program, there was some amount of controversy because Hiroshima had just happened less than a decade back. So everybody thought that India is now being mischief, looking up to that kind of a... So Homi Bhabha made a public declaration that our nuclear program will be dedicated to peaceful purposes. I think now under Prime Minister Modi, we have vindicated his vision. And so also space. Our space technology is now become a household... it's entered every Indian household. Yes. Not for reasons of launching rockets, but for other reasons. Hugely in communication sector, in navigation sector, disaster management.
I was going to ask you that. Are we planning, we've not yet approved Starlink. Are we planning to launch some kind of a satellite internet service such as that? An indigenous one perhaps? Is that on the cards?
No, we are into a communication in a big way, and we are with each next mission improving upon that. So, and in fact, we had the record of launching 144 satellites in a single go, which is a world record. Many of them were meant for this purpose. So, when we have a communication satellite, a navigation satellite is used for a wide spectrum of purposes, including the television network, disaster management, or disaster forecasts, or other things. I mean, it has multiple purposes, even for mapping of the farms, the lands. When we say that we are trying to have, we are seeking a governance which will be citizen-centric, and citizen would be the master of his own governance. It's again the space sector which is going. This beautiful program called Swamitva program, launched again by this government, where you can do the mapping of your farms, your land, without seeking the support or assistance of a revenue officer, by the use of space technology and by the use of drones. So even drones have been deregulated. Similarly, if you go by the crime detection, those illegal mining, many of the places now again space technology is coming handy. So I think in more ways than one. It's no longer only the launching of rockets. Right. Launching of rockets is important because you can't leave the space to others. So you have to occupy the space as you can't leave any other space. And also for geopolitical reasons. So, and also to realize, to make the world realize that, look here, you can also do it. But India has also created a beautiful role model of using both space technology as well as nuclear power, nuclear energy for purposes other than what it appears to be alone. Right. For utilization in bringing in ease of living for a common citizen.
Right. So I must ask you a few questions about your home state of Jammu and Kashmir in the recent assembly elections, which were the first elections after the abrogation of Article 370. The BJP and its allies did not do too well. What would you attribute as the causes to that?
No, I would not say it didn't do well. In fact, the BJP performance has been better than ever before in Jammu and Kashmir. Our vote percentage is also increased. In fact, we received the highest vote percentage, higher than the ruling party. And that's been possible because some of the seats we lost by just very small margins. And we improved our vote share tremendously in the Kashmir Valley, where it was a taboo. You could not even utter the name of Bharatiya Janata Party, leave alone carry its flag. Now the campaign there presented almost a similar scene as elsewhere in the country. So we have come a long way in Jammu and Kashmir, and our presence is felt. Our vote share has increased, and people are now across these sections looking up to BJP as a party, because not much of misgiving was being created about Bharatiya Janata Party, not only in Jammu Kashmir, also in Northeast. Because when I went to Northeast, I was made charge of that somewhere in December 2014, and I was there for 5, 6, 7 years. The report in the newspapers would be, a minister from India has come, a leader from Delhi. And the boys and girls from there would be hesitant to come to Delhi because all kind of, reports that you would see in media that somebody not being treated well or not being conducted well by peers here. But now you see entire tourism sector, entire hotel sector is full of the Northeast boys and girls. So there also, because they had created a lot of, I think the much of that doing is from the Congress party. कि जब बीजेपी आएगी आपका खान पान बंद हो जाएगा, आपका मीट अंडा बंद हो जाएगा, आपका पूजा पाठ बंद हो जाएगा, आपको धर्म परिवर्तन होगा, no what not. But then the people of Northeast realize, and so also the people of Jammu and Kashmir now, they look at this is a government which believes in the basic mantra of justice to all, appeasement to none. So when appeasement to none does not mean that you are actually trying to interfere with their personal way of life. And that's how the entire Northeast now virtually is being ruled by BJP run states or the BJP allied governments. So I think that is that, and thankfully that has happened mostly after 2014 because Prime Minister Modi has a great connecting power. I mean, he's one name who connects east, west, north, south, northeast. We have seen in the early days when he became Prime Minister, we had invited him to Meghalaya. That was being ruled by a different party, and the population composition was also not very supportive towards this part, BJP, and we sought one public rally, and many of my companions there said, would you be able to manage it? Where will you get the crowd from? Do you have to arrange transport from the neighboring states? Because somebody as big a person as Modi is arriving, so you issue a prestige. But you would be surprised when Prime Minister Modi landed there with small school children dressed in their beautiful uniforms, holding hands, making a human chain. All those Christian schools there. So that is the connect. And I think that has really helped transform and also mainstreaming of all sections of society, different regions of the country.
Right. So one demand in your state of Jammu and Kashmir that the ruling National Conference and of course Congress have is that they're pressing for the restoration of full statehood. Is there a possibility of a quick decision in this regard? What is the timeline that you are looking at?
I think I don't need to answer that because it's been already stated by Prime Minister, none less than Prime Minister, more than once, that at the appropriate time the statehood would be restored. He spoke that in the public rallies also. Home Minister has spoken about it at the floor of the House. I don't think there's any propriety or any need to add to what has been said by the Honourable Prime Minister and the Honourable Home Minister. So I think we have every reason to trust them and to believe in what they say.
Right. So when you look at BJP's representation within the Kashmir Valley itself, one of the reasons cited is that there's lack of adequate representatives there. But one of the paradoxes is that you have a member of parliament today who is actually somebody who has been jailed under UAPA, that is Engineer Rashid. How do you justify this kind of paradox that exists?
I think there's so many dynamics operating during an election time. And I would not like to get into that because all said and done, he's been elected by the people. So he's there. But of course, sometimes it's a vote of sentiment and which is also sometimes followed by regret. So I can't spell out how will this phenomena last or how will it shape up.
Right. So last several months, both before and after the election, we have been seeing a surge in terrorist attack. Security personnel and civilians have lost their lives. What really is the strategy to counter this? Because particularly we've seen a lot of activity in the Jammu region, where was traditionally not as active in terms of the militants as we had seen in the Kashmir region previously.
Yeah, I think if you go into the genesis of that, what happened in the least recent months was the tremendous pressure on the terrorists. So, faced by that heat, they try to shift focus to the Jammu region. Now, the difference topographically between Kashmir Valley and Jammu is that Kashmir is more of a plain area. It's more of plains. Whereas in the Jammu region, you have hills, you have rivers, you have rivulets, you have nalas. So there are a lot of potential hiding places also. And when they shifted over initially, maybe our security forces had to then revise the strategy and then also deal with them. But I think now it's been taken care of. But by and large, these incidents happening occasionally, I do not think follow the pattern of militancy or terrorism which has happened in the last 30 years. Because by and large, it's quite a compatible atmosphere, and I think that is evident from the fact that we have as many as 2.5 crore tourists. Now, I always say that a tourist visiting the Kashmir Valley is the biggest testimony, because he would not believe what the media is saying. He would not believe what a minister is saying. He would not believe what a political government is saying. If he has to carry his family for a holiday, he'll try to verify from his own sources. He'll call up one of his colleagues, one of his friends there, one of his relatives there, one of his acquaintances there, and ask him, कि भाई साहब बच्चों को लेकर आना है, हालात सही हैं कि नहीं? Only then he would move. He would not risk the life of his kith and kin. So if 2.5 crore tourists, and it was amazing last year, even the home tourism got exhausted because there was no place in the houses. Now Kashmir was not very well known for, not much known for home tourism. Those home tourism was prevalent in Northeast, but not in, because there people, the tourists prefer staying in houseboats, in huts, in the suburbs. But so such a heavy rush that the home tourism also came into play, and the houses also got exhausted. So I think things are fast moving out, and the kind of development that has happened in the last 10 years is actually making the people realize, even the common man walking in the streets and lanes of Srinagar city wants to have peace, because he's seen 3 generations being lost at the altar of all those myths created by these vested interests, the so-called Azadi, etc., which he now realizes was something meant to benefit a handful of those who wanted to continue their supremacy either in the seat of power or relevance, whereas the common man lost out. And mind you, a common youth of Kashmir is very, very aspirational. You see the civil services exams, you see the industry, you see the young boys and girls are always very, forward-looking and very aspirational. So they can see how many opportunities, avenues have been unfolded across the country after Prime Minister Modi came, and they don't wish to miss the bus. So I think that also has made a change and sought to bring a change of heart.
Well, aspirational youth, certainly, of course, youth carry with them a lot of hope, and certainly hope that's the case with Jammu and Kashmir as well, sir. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Madhav. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.